Stop. Talk to me.
Crystal, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Sorry to look up as though I'm surprised that you're sitting across the
You're
table,
here.
but I was just thinking about this interview that we had with Alan Sorkin, our board member.
Yes.
And really, we've been wanting to do this for a while. Alan is a quiet force on the board, a lot of experience in the nonprofit sector, and I really enjoyed this conversation with him.
Me too. I think Alan is so thoughtful, but he wants to model what good philanthropy is. So I look forward to unpacking this conversation with you on the other side.
He thinks a lot about leadership. He thinks a lot about leadership in the nonprofit space.
Yes.
About impact. And it's funny, I was teasing him afterward that he speaks in aphorisms because he has a lifelong collection of sayings that he has picked up along the way, and they come out in his speech. So it makes him kind of fun to listen to as we do this interview.
Yeah. Shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
All right.
Alan Sorkin, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I've been excited about doing this interview. I was just joking with you before we walked in that you are in some ways the person I know the most about that I've interviewed, because you actually wrote an autobiography, and that's where I want to start. You have described your life as quite a ride. What do you think is the through line?
The through line is service, giving, and giving better. And you want me to elaborate on that?
Sure, please.
My background is in real estate. So I learned the concept of leverage very early. In fact, my earliest episode with philanthropy was my grandmother was being honored at a dinner. And for that honor, she was supposed to raise money. And so she came to me and she said, will you go door to door with this can and raise money? And I did it. And then she came back to me the next year and she said, I'm not being honored, but now I have to raise money. So will you do it again? And I said, only if you give me 25 cans.
Wow.
So I took the 25 cans and I went to every store in the neighborhood and they all took them. And I came back a month later and we raised a whole lot more money.
You had 25 times the money. Amazing.
So that's where I first learned about leverage.
Yeah.
And in all of the charitable and philanthropic efforts that I've had, I'm always trying to figure out how we can lever, because there's so much need, and there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, I think part of, and we'll get to this, but people in San Diego probably know you much more as a philanthropist and as a nonprofit leader and expert, as well as a coach, because you do that also. Than they do as a very successful entrepreneur and business person. And it is interesting that you find the through line through all of that experience to be around leverage and giving. So it's going to be that's why, in part, we wanted to do this interview.
I don't want to be known as a philanthropist. I try very hard not to talk about that.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
But the association with giving is hard to take away.
Yeah.
I understand. You wrote the book for your granddaughter. So you wrote your autobiography, and you talked about wanting her to have this. What was the message that you wanted to convey to her and your other offspring?
So it started out, my daughter sent me this book, and it was a fill in the blank. And I started answering the questions, and I have a lousy handwriting. So I knew that she'd be frustrated. And so one day I got industrious, and I dictated all the questions into a Word doc. And then I started filling it out. And a lot of the questions weren't germane to what I was doing in terms of charity and philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
So then I just started rewriting the questions. I had a really good role model in my father and learned a lot from him. But I didn't think I would have the opportunity with my granddaughter because she's not here in San Diego. And so I wanted her to get to know me, but more importantly, my philosophy of life. And so that was the impetus. And
what motivated you to put it on paper? And then did you know when you started to write it that your philosophy of life was around leverage and
no,
giving back?
No. They say you live life forward and understand it backward.
Yeah.
So I was a psych major in college, so I've always been a study of human behavior. And the most study has been directed at myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so as the years have gone by, I'm always reflecting back on what I did and then why I did it and how that can be useful moving forward.
Mm.
And so that through line became fairly obvious to me.
In the process of writing.
Yeah. Well, actually, it became obvious to me long before that.
Yeah.
But then as I was answering the questions about, who was your favorite friend in school, I decided to take it to a
knowing
different
you as
level.
I do, I laugh because I can imagine you getting impatient right away with that question.
Yeah, next.
and only because you're always focused on what's important. My experience of you is that you're always focused on what's important, and that sort of superficiality isn't interesting to you. It has led to surprising candor in your life. I mean, in the book, you talk openly about having a nervous breakdown in law school. You write about having this sense of obligation about succeeding in a certain way and wanting to prove yourself to your father, who you referred to as a good role model, but he was also tough on you, and you're open about that too. And so you went away to law school like many of us aspired to do, and some of us failed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And there you had a moment of a meltdown. Can you talk about that and why you were so open about it in your autobiography?
From the time I was 6 years old, I wanted to work with my father
Mm-hmm.
in real estate. So that was a lifelong dream, with one or two times in between thinking something else. But he felt, because he was a chemical engineer, that he wanted me to have a background different. So he insisted I go to law school, and I hated it from the first day. The Socratic method is barbaric. You have this professor who's working with the same 10 cases year after year, and he calls upon you, and the minute he calls upon you, he knows exactly where you're going, and then proceeds to make crap out of your argument.
Right.
And that was just not something I was used to and didn't like. I did okay in law school, but by the third semester, I was really fed up. And it was just before finals. And as I look back now, it was probably a panic attack. And I just said, I'm probably not going to pass. I've never failed anything in my life. It's better if I just withdraw and get out. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a role model, you got to take the bad with the good. And I think it's important certainly it was important for my granddaughter, my kids, and anybody else who's going to take the time to read the book, to understand, life is a series of roller coasters. There's ups and downs. And you never know what's going to be good and what's going to be bad. It was the best thing in the world for me, primarily because it was probably the first time in my life that I disappointed my father and stood up to him and said, I'm not doing it. So many people get trapped into doing things that they don't want to do.
Out of a sense of obligation to someone else.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So what did that, I mean, certainly that taught you a lesson about being your own person and standing up to your father. But it also taught you important lessons about how to manage your own anxiety and how to think about mental health issues for others. What were your takeaways from that?
So the takeaways come about much later in life. You know, I dropped out of school. My father then relented and basically said, well, nobody else is going to hire you, so you might as well come work for me.
There's a setup.
He was a wonderful teacher.
Uh-huh.
He had strange methods. But that led to very quickly my lifelong dream becoming a nightmare.
Mm.
And 6 months later, I was on my own.
Mm.
Started my own first company. And, you know, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've started 5 for-profit companies and 6 nonprofit companies, and then board chair for an international foundation and social entrepreneur. So that was the journey. And as I said, it's always been about looking back at my own behavior and what did I learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned was this too shall pass. You know, the failure of dropping out of law school led to, I guess you could say, another failure working for my father, but that ultimately led to me becoming a successful real estate developer.
Mm-hmm. But you had to go through that rite of passage to do it.
And I think, you know, nobody gets out unscathed. Everybody's got a rite of passage. And the lesson is, you know, in many cases you'll come out.
You've even written and spoken about this idea that you never know what is a truly good or bad moment. You know, the Buddhist
the
parable.
Taoist farmer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. The farmer who, a series of things happen and everybody says, oh, that's a terrible thing. He says, good, bad, maybe.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And how have you internalized that lesson?
I did internalize it for many years.
Yeah.
You know, I saw success is a trap, especially if you're an overachiever. You know, you work really hard to get to a goal, and then you get there and you celebrate it for about 10 minutes, and then you go on to the next one. So that's kind of a treadmill kind of thing. And the disappointments, for me, my mother used to say, the measure of a man who can get knocked down, who gets up one more time than he gets knocked down. And so if something turns out to be bad, for me, that's just more encouragement to work harder to fix it, to move on to the next level. So hopefully it keeps on stepping up as it has to being on the Prebys board.
And we'll talk about that eventually. But I laughed when you said success is a trap, because we get to this point of succeeding at something and immediately want to climb the next mountain and are disappointed with ourselves for not having climbed that mountain.
Yep.
You coach a lot of executives, and I wonder how common, you know, I think people who wrestle with anxiety issues sometimes feel like they're the only one. How common is this among the people that you work with, would you say, and have known over the years?
I am yet to meet a CEO who doesn't feel imposter syndrome. And I would say in many cases it's because of a relationship with their father. And so I'm not good enough generally spurs them on to be successful. I mean, I worked 100 hours a week for 14 years to prove them wrong. It was expensive in lots of ways, but I did it.
Right.
And I see that with a lot of my CEOs.
Yeah. Still trying to prove themselves, always trying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We may have to take a break here for a little therapy between Alan and me. I really appreciate that perspective, because I do think that this is really common, and anxiety comes from lots of different sources, but this is certainly one that people who feel almost ashamed of, because they feel like they shouldn't feel that anxiety. But I think what you're describing is that we do, and
the
higher up you go, the more anxiety you have.
That type of anxiety, yeah. I think what's liberating, the gift you gave to people, was that you were candid about it yourself. You know, about what had happened to you. So, I want to switch for a moment now to talk about how you go from being a serial entrepreneur is also another through line. So you mentioned that you started a series of successful companies, and then you started a series of nonprofits.
Actually, they were kind of simultaneous.
That's right. They overlap with each other. But what was let's talk a little bit about the background that led to your involvement in the nonprofit sector. And, you know, you've already shared about the 25 cans. Yeah. So you came in as a fundraiser. Mm-hmm. You're a development expert. As a kid, 10 years old, right? Yep. But starting an organization, leading an organization, is a different matter. And what took you in that direction after all the work you'd done in the real estate business, and then restaurant business?
So there was a personal situation around substance abuse that got me involved in my first organization.
And this wasn't you, but a member of your family.
Correct.
Yeah.
And when it happened, I wound up at a support group, and they gave me some really good advice I couldn't get anywhere else. I was able to network up to the Surgeon General and the Director of National Institute of Drug Abuse, and they both said, we'd love to help, but we do policy work. And this organization helped me deal with this situation. And I went back to them and I said, you know, I got better information here than all of these people in much higher positions, and I would like to expand this organization. And at the time, we were working with about 25 families a week. And I didn't know anything about nonprofits, but my brother's an attorney, and I called him and I said, get me a nonprofit status, and I'm going to raise some money. You mentioned sales. I remember my father telling me when I was very young, he says, if you get good at sales, you can make $100,000 a year. That's many years ago. That 100,000 is millions today. And so I was fairly confident that I could raise money for this organization. And very quickly, we expanded from 25 families a week to 250 families, 5 different locations. And then I realized that we had to get ahead of this and start doing prevention. And there was a SAMHSA federal grant for $100,000 for community organizations that were dealing with teenage alcohol and drug abuse. And so I wrote my first grant, which didn't even get scored. So hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
And turned out that a friend of mine knew the woman who scored them. So she said, the next time you're in Washington, I'll set up a meeting with you and Elvira. And I showed up for breakfast, and she had my grant filled with red. It looked like a high school term paper and questions in here. And she basically told me what I did wrong, and I rewrote it, and I got the $100,000. And I went to this organization that I had been going to marketing my program, and it was made up of primarily school counselors, principals, law enforcement, DEA, who were all dealing with adolescent substance abuse. And I said to the founder, who's a veterinarian, I said, Frank, I said, if you're willing to turn this organization from a discussion group into an action group, I can get us $100,000. He said, have at it. He says, but who's going to run it? I said, well, I'm serving as the volunteer CEO of my organization, and I think I can do both. So I did, and we built that coalition into the third largest anti-drug coalition in the country.
Amazing.
From that, I was rewarded with building a binational coalition in Tijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I woke up exhausted. I'd been working harder there than I'd ever worked for profit, and realized that there was never going to be enough money to fix all the broken kids.
Mm.
And so I shut down one organization, transitioned the other two, and I was out of work again. But then I heard about a group in Seattle called Social Venture Partners, which was helping nonprofits become more effective and sustainable. So my wife and I, along with 5 other couples, started that program here.
And it's such a logical transition for somebody like you who, having run yourself into the ground
Failed again.
With, you built things that
Yeah,
for a time had an impact.
We helped a lot of people.
Yeah. But what you
but I
realized
could still
was
see it as
the cycle would just keep
didn't
going
work.
on. Right.
And
so
nonprofits need a lot of help.
So what you then looked for and found was a solution that would help lots of nonprofits to get better at and more sustainable at their work.
It was getting the business community involved.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I found was the business people had this mentality of, those nonprofits, they never accomplish anything. They waste money. They're always in the papers, theft, etc. And the nonprofit people look at the other people and say, the damn business people, all they care about is making money.
Right.
And I would say, you're both right and you're both wrong.
Yeah.
And what about the power of putting the two together?
And that's what you saw in Social Venture Partners,
Exactly.
which today is Amplify.
Correct.
Right.
And I called that, where the power of business meets the passion of giving.
And I want to explore that in a moment, but I want to come back for a moment to you as a leader across these platforms. And so, where we are and what you're describing is you've had a successful career in entrepreneurism. Your father notwithstanding, you've done very well.
Mm-hmm.
And you have experimented with a number of approaches in the nonprofit arena and made an impact, and now found a more sustainable way to continue contributing there. You're also, at a certain point, taking on the role of being a coach through Vistage and taking everything you've learned from being a leader in those different realms into advising leaders who are still on the journey. I'm curious, as you went into that, what did you see as the through lines around leadership that you were ready to impart to these leaders who are still more actively in the game?
So I've made a lot of mistakes.
I love how you say that.
As a leader.
Yeah.
And there's no reason not to help people that I care about not make those mistakes.
Yeah.
I tell them, you're going to make mistakes, but make new ones.
Mm.
You don't have to make all of these.
Give us an example of something you had to learn the hard way by leading people.
One of the best lessons I learned was to listen.
Mm.
Leadership to me is helping people to get where they want to go.
Mm.
And oftentimes, if you're successful, you know better.
Mm.
And you wind up trying to direct them in a way that they're not comfortable with. They don't buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the best way to lead a horse is where it's going. And I remember one of my mentors was Alpha Chapman, who was the publisher of Knight Ridder Publications.
Right.
He was also the co-founder of the Miami Coalition Against Drugs.
Yeah.
And
Heck of a mentor to have.
And I was talking to him one day, and he said, because when we try to build a coalition here, it's like, who do I need? What do I have to do?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, the first thing you need to do is find someone like a university president. And I said, why a university president?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, university presidents have a whole lot of constituents. And they have the amazing ability to listen to this one and this one and this one and this one, and then parrot back something where they all feel that they're part of the vision.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so what I've always found is if you listen to what people care about and you can create a vision that everybody can buy into, you have a much better chance of success.
So what would you say are, as you have sat with now hundreds of leaders who have gone through one of your programs, and I know that you have alumni all over this town because I meet them, and they talk glowingly about working with you. What do you see for all of us who are leaders? What's the most common blind spot that you encounter with leaders? You named one that we all think we're right, which I think is absolutely a challenge. But what else did you encounter as major blind spots?
I think that's it. They tend not to want to get other opinions that might conflict with theirs. And so they often embark on a direction that's not helpful.
And so how do you help them see that, own that, and not do that?
For me, because I have a group of 16 CEOs, they all think they're different. But in reality, in 18 years, we see the same problem over and over again. So it's usually very easy. Hopefully, I can point out to someone in the group that's still there and say, "You remember when Grant did this?" And if I don't have someone in the group, I can tell them a story about someone that's been there. And if they hear that often enough, it's like, maybe I ought to rethink a little bit. Because, there's hundreds of thousands of books on leadership. Mm-hmm. And every leader aspires to be a great leader. And there's really no playbook. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of my group is new leaders get to try on what somebody else has done, or conversely, go the opposite direction of the way somebody has done it wrong. It's a great learning opportunity.
Right. So it really is that pure learning opportunity.
Absolutely.
The you have said that, and this is a really interesting way of looking at working with a group of leaders. You have said that it's not my group, I'm just the leader, which is not how most leaders would talk. Unpack that for me a little bit, what you mean by that.
Okay, so that's a very specific situation. So the book that I wrote for my granddaughter, I shared it with a friend of mine, and he said, "Have you shared this with your Vistage group?" And I said, "No. Why would I?" And he said, "Well, you've said to me, you've learned more than they have. Mm-hmm. So why don't you share those lessons with them?" Mm. And so I went out and self-published and did that. And one of the lessons in that which does not apply to any other situation I've been in. You know, CEOs are a rare breed. And when you put 16 of them in a room together, there's a very unusual dynamic. And when I started 18 years ago, being the control freak that I am, I tried to control them. Mm-hmm. And it didn't work. And so I now have learned that my job is more of a facilitator. I can share my lessons with them, you know, because I meet with each of them individually. But in a group setting, it's just much easier because if I try to control a CEO, he or she is just going to push back, mm-hmm. and then we have this. And that doesn't serve anybody. But if I can facilitate that, because they're all there for the same reason. They all want to become better leaders.
I actually think it's a beautiful statement, a lesson in how to herd cats.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Because every one of those...
Big cats with big egos.
Right, yeah. And an important insight into how you view leadership itself. Mm-hmm. So let's come back. Let's think about how you have applied these leaderly skills to the social enterprise work. When you got involved with Social Venture Partners, now Amplify, you were thinking about the need for disruption to the nonprofit model. So was philanthropy. And part of that was to marry the skill set of the business community with the needs of the different needs of the nonprofit community. How relevant now, years later, are you feeling that model still is, and how receptive are you finding nonprofits to be for that kind of assistance?
So I think it's more true today, especially today, with what's going on in the current environment. But, you know, 25 years ago when we started Social Venture Partners, we basically took what we knew in the business world and tried to jam it down the throats of nonprofits. And what we've learned is nonprofit leaders are as good or better than for-profit leaders because they got that triple bottom line. Mm. And so by combining that knowledge, and I think there's more people retiring at a younger age, and even people who are still working, a need for purpose. And the caliber of partners that we're attracting today is higher than it's ever been. And the tools that we have to help nonprofits. You know, when we first started, we gave them a modest sum of money and some consulting help. And what we learned was they came for the money and they stayed for the help.
Ah, interesting.
So we shifted our model, which was basically 2 organizations a year for 3 years. We had a portfolio of 6, 2 would roll on, 2 would roll off. And about 5-6 years ago, one of our newest executive directors said, I think there's a better model here. Mm-hmm. And I had always felt that what we did was great, but 6 organizations at the time, there were probably 9,000 nonprofits, you know, not going to have much effect. And so by switching the model to doing 3 to 6 month consulting engagements, we got to serve a lot more organizations. You know, we served 120 organizations in the last 5 years. We did 60 consulting agreements last year.
Amazing.
And nonprofits are coming back over and over again.
So a very deliberate decision to scale up with a very different model. And, we probably don't have time to talk about it here, but again, an expression of a willingness to disrupt because...
And leverage.
But...
and scale.
Both of those things. But you were willing to make changes that the national social venture partners didn't see as their model any longer.
Right.
So you effectively grew the organization out of its national affiliate,
Yep.
right? And decided to become you collectively decided to become a different thing. How scary was that? Talk about leaving the nest. You had started by bringing that model to San Diego.
Any organization that 25 years later is not looking at their model is destined for disruption. It was very clear to me that it needed to be scaled. We had the tools to do it. And it was just getting the right people in place to make it happen.
So you're this just demonstrates this point, but you're very strategic in how you think about helping an organization and what good, effective giving looks like. When you took on the role as a board member at Prebys, how were you thinking about how an entity that is in the philanthropy business or that is in the giving business goes from generosity to impact?
So I got a call from Dan Yates,
who has been on this program and is chair of our board.
Right. About, I think it was 2020.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was after 5 years ago. And Dan had been recruited on the board. And he called me and said, nobody on this board knows anything about nonprofits or philanthropy. Would you come on? And at that point, I had turned down probably 4 or 5 other board positions. I probably served on 10 boards over the years, and I was just sort of done. But when I heard about the assets that Prebys had, it was just something that I can't not do.
Mm-hmm.
So I came on, and really I knew a lot about San Diego and nonprofits, but I really didn't know anything about philanthropy.
Mm.
I called a friend of mine, Paul Shoemaker, who was actually the founder of
Social Venture Partners.
Yeah. And Paul knows everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I want to meet a half a dozen foundations, find out how they got started, what did they do right, and what did they do wrong.
Mm.
And it was during COVID, now that I think about it, because half the foundations were in New York and the other half were in the Bay Area. And had it not been for COVID, I would have to get on an airplane and
go learn all of that.
And hope to get 10 minutes
Yeah.
with each of those. As it turned out, they were more than willing to talk. So I spent an hour and a half with each of them. The first thing that they taught me was that we had to get the board on the same page. Same thing I knew before, but it's like, what do I know about getting a board on?
Mm-hmm. And on which page? Right.
Yeah, I had no idea what
Right.
pages there were.
Right.
So we hired a philanthropic consultant,
Mm-hmm.
and they did a great job with the 4 board members. In fact, as I remember when you came on, you said that we had a really good strategic direction from which you could work on. So we had all of our board members on the right page. And then when it came time to hire a CEO, she found the right search firm who found the right CEO. And
that is the pathway that led to,
and the rest is history.
Yeah. I'm very fond of that group. It no longer exists, actually.
Right.
But Alexa Caldwell, who headed it, is
she's gone on to do bigger and better things too.
She's right at the Sobrato Foundation in the Bay Area, so doing extraordinary work. But it is the reason I asked the question was really that, and what I was hoping to get from your answer was that you saw the importance of having a strategy and setting a true north and some expectations, so that the giving wasn't just giving; it was about trying to have an impact, and that was very important to you, I think, when you came on this board.
Yeah. In fact, if you remember our conversation, it was like, we have 4 focus areas, and you've got to come up with a 10-year plan that's going to show impact.
So you have had this remarkable career spanning work in the for-profit sector that provided you powerful lessons about being a human and being a leader, that you also migrated over with you into the nonprofit arena, taught you a lot about impact, I think, as well. Then you had to learn some humbling lessons in the nonprofit arena about how different impact is in an organization where there's no apparent bottom line.
Different and difficult.
Yeah, right. How would you synthesize those very different life experiences? You know, looking back, you said your through line is about leverage. Having talked about it for a little while here, is there anything else that leaps out at you?
Building an organization is building an organization, whether it's a for-profit company, a nonprofit, or a foundation. You know, it's getting the right team in place, coming up with a North Star, coming up with a vision, and trying to get as many people behind that vision as possible.
I mean, that actually suggests the last question that I want to ask, which is across the span of all these experiences you've had, and we haven't, I mean, you have such a rich background. We haven't even talked about some of your personal experiences where you encountered the need to depend on other people and then you helped out those other people, and you've got good karma in your life, or good karmic exchange. But what have you learned about what brings community and people together in the work that you've done? Because we're sitting here at this moment where people there's a high level of despair in the country about who can make a difference, what can get done, how we can have an impact. What would you say to people as they're struggling with all of that you've learned, that you believe in we can still have an impact and make a difference?
I don't think I'm that smart to answer that question. But
I do love your humility.
If it were that simple, it would have been solved already.
Yeah.
But I think a clear vision with a clear strategy, made up of listening to all the disparate voices.
Yep.
So everybody feels heard and feels that they want to be part of the collective solution. And good leadership.
Well, and I think, the reason I wanted to press you on that is, and you certainly are smart enough to answer that question, but the reason I wanted to press you on it is I just think that what you have described over the course of this too brief time together is a formula for how people can lead even in difficult times. And, what we encounter in our work, and you know this because we talk about it all the time, is that every organization we are privileged to fund and every community partner that we get to work with, there's a leader in there who is making something happen. And the formula exists for turning things around. And I think you just shared an important part of it. So I appreciate that. Alan, is there anything that you wish I had asked you?
No, probably not.
Okay. This is, for those of you who don't know Alan, this is very typical of he says what he wants to say.
Say it straight or it comes out crooked.
Right. And I love that. And I just want to say I so appreciate you as a board member of this organization. To me, you embody the concept of community stewardship, and you have actually been in the game of trying to, and I'm referring to it as though it's a game, but you've been in this business and you have tried to work with it yourself, and you have learned hard lessons and rich insights, and you share them. And we are really lucky to have you, and San Diego is really lucky to have you. So thank you for everything you're doing.
And likewise, we are lucky to have you.
Appreciate it. All right. Okay. What'd you think?
Alan's journey and even the stopping to write the biography, I understand why he has such clarity. He's worked to find his purpose, how it relates to community. And so it really connected. As a person who actually read his book, it really connected for me.
You and I both read his autobiography, and there is a lot of self-reflection there.
Right
it's not just a recounting of events. And he does talk about his road to the work he did and to the way he looks at nonprofit impact. What I love, among many things, is how personal this is for him, and how honest and authentic he is in talking about it. The fact that he set off to become a lawyer and was trying to prove himself to his hard-driving father and had a breakdown around that and had to rebuild himself and then did that in business, and then when that ran its course, decided for very personal reasons he was going to get into the nonprofit arena, and went through the same cycle of learning and development. There's just a lot of self-reflection in how he talks about this work.
Yeah, self-reflection and scale.
Yeah.
Even the story he tells of being a young man and his aunt a relative asking him to go with a little can to raise funds. And he said, okay, I'll do it again, but this year give me, 20 cans or
Wasn't
whatever
that a
it
great
was.
story?
Yeah, I was like, wow, was 10 or 15 and already scaling.
Story.
I know. I was like, oh, you don't want that kid knocking on your door. There goes your money. But yeah, I think his vision of how to make something strong and then make it even more impactful through scale really stood out to me.
Right. Another point that stood out for me was, again, coming back to the idea of how personal this is for him. When we talk about leadership, and we talk to leaders in doing this sort of work, it is always striking how the people who press on through difficult circumstances and good circumstances, they are the ones who are mission driven. They're not showing up for the paycheck. They're showing up because they believe something important needs to happen in the world, and they're going to do that thing. For Alan, that grew out of a very personal experience with family around addiction initially and recovery, and that got him into trying to create nonprofits that would make a difference for his family and in his space.
Right.
And he learned from that process, number one, how many lessons from business could be applied to the nonprofit world, but also how different the nonprofit world was.
Absolutely. There was a positioning of the nonprofit. Who are we listening to? What's the kind of change we're driving? And you can tell he's constantly thinking, how do I improve this thing? That's my experience of him also as a board member. It's what else can we do? What more is there to achieve this goal?
Yeah. Well, and he is always, as a community leader and as a board member, I think, he always talks in terms of impact and leveraging outcomes. It's funny. We have an almost standing line of commentary between us about how we scale up and how we achieve impact. And it's because he looks at almost any opportunity and says, okay, if you can do that, how can you do even more?
Exactly.
But at the same time, he's keenly aware of how difficult that is in the nonprofit sector, because he's done it multiple times. And, I actually love the part of his story where his experience in the business world and then his experience in the nonprofit sector merge in his founding or co-founding the chapter of Social Venture Partners in San Diego. And when he did that, that was a very new idea still in American philanthropy, that you could wed business leaders with something and entrepreneurs with ideas to offer, with nonprofits, with missions that could benefit from that expertise.
Right.
And, I think what was important for his model of that is it was not imposing business leaders on nonprofits or business thinking on nonprofits. It was trying to marry the two. And the fact that he started that up was just another aspect of the entrepreneurism that he brings.
Yeah, and just to remind folks, Social Venture Partners is now Amplified Impact Partners, but that group, the learning he did early on with them, and then he came back and figured out, how do I mentor other folks, offer insight. We know that's a practice he continues, and that is really how we not only scale business, but scale the impact of our work, right? And so the fact that he's able to do that with local leaders here, it's like he's seeding that next generation of leaders day in and day out.
Yeah. The Amplified Partners example is a good illustration of adaptation, and I would say, from the standpoint of a leader like him, a substantial amount of courage. He articulated this philosophy that everything changes. He said, one of his aphorisms, "This too shall pass."
Yes. Yes.
and that and his notion that success is a trap. That even success sometimes leads you to a cul-de-sac where you're no longer adapting and no longer seeing the need for change. He helped launch the chapter of Social Venture Partners here in San Diego, but he and his partners ultimately realized that model needed to evolve, that it was too much of the top-down model of business telling nonprofits how to operate,
right,
and that it needed to be working in partnership across these organizations and with more partners at the table, and not just focused on getting money from people so that they could play as donors, but so that they were actual partners with the organizations. It was such a radical change, actually, for the national model that they got booted out of the national system because they were daring to innovate with a whole new way of doing this. And if I had to bank on, as we effectively have, on which of those models is going to be more relevant in the future, I think it is the amplified model. Right. As the more sustaining one over time.
Yeah, and I think Alan reminds all of us, and I know he noted it in multiple places in this conversation, like philanthropy is also your time and your talent. And so, he's always looking. I actually consulted him when I was thinking about joining a board, and he talks about, is that the best way you can give? Are there other ways to support? And I think this new model is speaking to all of those things, right? How else do we, we don't just want to keep repeating the wheel. The flywheel's got to change over time. And I think he's succeeded in that. And I think more models will hopefully, more organizations will hopefully follow that model.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I also just generally loved how he talked about leadership, that, and he clearly over a lot of years has developed a distinct leadership philosophy. You notice in the way he talks that he's not really comfortable putting himself out front.
Yep.
But he is very comfortable with asking hard, penetrating questions. And in his leadership coaching, working with business leaders primarily, but also with some nonprofit folks. This is what he's known for. He's known for putting people together with each other so that they're learning from each other in cohorts and groups,
Exactly.
but that they're also being confronted with questions about whether they're pushing themselves enough, whether
Yes.
they're doing the things that they need to do to achieve the impact that they say they want to achieve. However, and this is a really, I think, important point too, he's also asking them about whether they're taking the time to take care of themselves and self-care. And I think this is a piece, because he's lived the life he has, he sees the importance of this, that a leader who loses balance, he talks to me about this quite a bit, actually, with varying success, but that a leader who loses balance is risking their own effectiveness. And I think we all experience this, right?
Oh, totally.
We just want to keep going and do that, especially mission-driven folks, you'll keep showing up as long as you think there's a chance to make a difference.
Yeah.
And he is very careful to point out that you will lose effectiveness over time.
Well, and to that point, I think part of his balance is also the learning. We know he's a student for life, right? So even here, when we were training, for example, on AI, right, he's like, here's everything I've read, here's some mentors, here's some coaching. And so I think that also probably keeps the balance of life and work, but also just that curiosity and that desire to help, I think, really shape his leadership and probably has shaped all of us by working with him.
Yeah. So, I think when we look at Alan as a community member, Alan as a board member, all of these things came out in this interview that you can clearly understand why he's outstanding and so important in the civic space in San Diego, even though his role is very much most of the time behind the scenes.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you, Alan, for that interview.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Yeah. Take care.
Stop. Talk to me.